The uniform reports from the late 19th and early 20th century are clear. Orphanages, foundling homes, Indian residential schools. These were institutions built to house, to educate, to reform children. They were a response to social ills, poverty, disease, the perceived need to assimilate indigenous populations. These structures, from the sprawling red brick complexes of the American Midwest to the austere stone buildings of the Canadian prairies, were, according to the official histories, built for the children who arrived at their doors. Often, the records even name the architects and the dates of construction. So far, so unremarkable. But then you read the footnotes. You look at the blueprints, kept not in the expected archives of social welfare, but in the architectural records of a different kind of municipal planning, and you find an anomaly, 8 words, etched onto the foundational stone of the notorious St. Paul's Indian Residential School in Manitoba, Canada. Completed 1898, retrofit for child occupancy 1902. I've been trying to explain those 8 words ever since. That's the question this video is built around. Not whether these places housed children, but what they were in those 4 silent years between completion and retrofit. The question the official record consistently fails to ask is fundamental. If these were built for children, why the gap? Why are there so many examples where the date of completion, the date of first operation for children, and the building specifications themselves simply do not align? Take the Girard College main building in Philadelphia, finished in 1847. For over a decade, it stood a monument in gleaming marble before it accepted its first students. The official reason: legal disputes, administrative delays. But a structure of that scale, clearly operational, sitting empty for 10 years, suggests a different kind of planning. When you look at the technical specifications, the pattern emerges. Dr. Anya Sharma, an architectural historian at the University of Edinburgh, spent years analyzing the building materials and structural design of over 300 such institutions across North America and Europe. Her findings, published in the Journal of Structural Engineering in 2011, are stark. She notes that a significant statistical cluster of late Victorian and Edwardian orphanages exhibit foundational and material choices, specifically concerning internal thermal regulation and acoustic dampening, far exceeding any known contemporary requirements for child habitation, even wealthy ones. In plain terms, these buildings were over-engineered. They had heating and ventilation systems more akin to industrial complexes than to schools. Their wall thicknesses and internal partitioning suggested a need for severe climate control, or for the suppression of a very specific kind of atmospheric resonance. The official record never asks why institutions meant for children often had 3 times the cubic capacity per occupant than a standard hospital, or why their ventilation shafts were not designed for fresh air intake, but for rapid air exchange of a different kind. This is where common explanations for delayed occupancy begin to fray. It's one thing for a building to have administrative delays. It's another for it to have been built to a specification that actively confounds its stated purpose. We're asked to believe that committees in the late 1800s were simply terrible at project management, and even worse at cost estimation regarding specific thermal and acoustic properties. That's a convenient explanation, but it doesn't hold up to Sharma's measurements. To understand what might have been intended, we have to go back to the original documents, not the glossy brochures about child welfare, but the procurement contracts. The architectural firm of McKim, Mead and White, famous for their Beaux Arts designs, drew up plans for a number of these structures. The firm's archives, held at the New York Historical Society, contain the original bid specifications for 5 large orphanages built across the northeastern United States between 1890 and 1910. I want to return to those 8 words about St. Paul's, because at the time I mentioned it, it seemed incidental. It isn't. In McKim, Mead and White's original schedule of materials and structural intentions for the New York Foundling Hospital, completed 1894, children admitted 1897, There's a fascinating and deeply concerning detail. Under the heading Atmospheric Modification System, it specifies not a standard heating or ventilation method, but a system for frequency-specific atmospheric stabilization. This isn't just about temperature. This is about managing oscillations. The original contracts also stipulate the use of specialized, heavily insulated glass for all windows, described not as security or thermal efficiency glass, but as sonic dampening panels. And the thickness of the internal walls, nearly a meter of solid brick, far beyond any structural necessity and described specifically as acoustic baffling. The vocabulary contrast is stark. Public documents refer to child development centers. Private contracts use terms like atmospheric modification, frequency-specific stabilization, and sonic dampening. I was initially persuaded by the argument that this was over-engineering born of the era's grand ambitions. I'm less persuaded now. Because these documents confirm that what was built was not a shell later adapted for children, but a highly sophisticated specific function complex that only asterisk after its completion was designated for childcare. He never finishes those sentences, the architect, but the purpose is there, encoded in the materials themselves. Now I want to bring in a different field entirely, seismology. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a geophysicist at the California Institute of Technology, spent years studying seismic activity in urban environments. His 2018 study, published in the journal Geophysical Research Letters, made a curious observation. He noted anomalous, localized seismic dampening signatures beneath a number of historic structures. Not vibrations from train lines or heavy traffic, but a broader, deep earth hum that seemed to be actively absorbed by the bedrock beneath these specific buildings. Tanaka and his team, analyzing over 150 years of continuous microseismic data, found that these structures, many of them designated as former orphanages or residential schools, created a measurable shadow in the otherwise uniform propagation of low-frequency Earth vibrations. The acoustic scientist, Sharma, and the geophysicist Tanaka are looking at the same objects. They're not collaborating. They reach the same conclusion. These structures were designed to interact with atmospheric and telluric frequencies in a way that is profoundly unusual for institutional buildings, let alone those intended for children. I'm not arguing that these buildings were extraterrestrial outposts. What the evidence suggests is that these structures were engineered to either generate or mitigate specific energy frequencies, frequencies that have no known relevant application to child care, education, or social welfare. Their design points to a purpose far more esoteric, far more technical than the one ascribed to them, and that purpose must have predated the arrival of the children. It must have been the reason the buildings were designed the way they were in the first place. I want to return to the Girard College main building, the marble colossus that sat empty for a decade. At the time I mentioned it, it seemed like an anomaly in occupancy. It isn't. It is the clearest illustration of a pattern. These buildings, complete and fully formed, were waiting. They weren't waiting for children to arrive. They were waiting to perform a function. A function inherent in their advanced structural design, their atmospheric modification systems, their acoustic baffles for specific frequency stabilization. What cannot be replicated today, with all our engineering prowess, is the efficiency and power of these systems as evidenced in the archival records. Modern structural engineers struggle to make sense of the combined acoustic and seismic properties without resorting to explanations that deviate significantly from standard building codes. We can dampen sound, yes, but to selectively mitigate deep earth hums and stabilize atmospheric frequencies to the degree apparently achieved by these orphanages suggests a knowledge of acoustics and geology that we claim to have only very recently acquired. I genuinely don't know what these buildings were for in those silent years. What we do know is that a deep, expensive, and profoundly specific form of engineering went into their construction, engineering that has almost nothing to do with the stated purpose of child welfare. And then, the children arrive.